As the campfire burned in the center, the smell of venison cooking on the grill wafted through the air. This camping trip to the Sierra Nevada near the town of Truckee, California, would have been a perfect family outing. But when 6-year-old Billy Hargrove saw the meat on his plate, he began to cry. His face turned pale. His hands began to shake. Then he pushed his plate toward his parents. "I can't do it. The pass was closed. We were so hungry, we had to eat it." His mother, Diane, was shocked by what she heard. His father, Robert, knelt down and asked him what he meant. Billy looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than his 6 years. "First, George Donner died. We didn't want him to. But the snow kept falling. The Hargrove family had never taught their son about the Donner Party. They had never mentioned the winter of 1846, but Billy knew about it. 3 months later, what they found in a cave that didn't appear on any historical map would prove that it wasn't just a fantasy. You are about to witness the best documented case of child reincarnation in American history, a story that forces scientists to confront the impossible. The Hargrove family was an ordinary family from Sacramento. Billy was a bright and cheerful child. They were not religious people. They did not believe in ghosts or past lives. They did not believe in anything that could not be explained by logic and reason. That was what made what happened in the mountains so terrifying. In late March 2018, they decided to go on a weekend camping trip to the Sierra Nevada, east of Truckee. The snow was melting. The weather was sunny. Robert had been promising Billy an adventure for months. They arrived at the campsite on Friday afternoon. They pitched their tents among the pine trees. Billy seemed happy. There was no sign of anything unusual. But on Saturday night, everything changed. Robert had caught 2 big fish earlier in the day. He decided to grill them for dinner. When the fish were done, he took out a package of venison he had brought from home. Diane set the table. Billy sat on a log. He hummed a tune, swinging his legs. It was the kind of peaceful moment parents would remember forever. But this moment would be remembered for entirely different reasons. Robert placed a piece of venison on Billy's plate. The child looked at him. The atmosphere became silent. Diane was the first to notice. "Billy, are you okay, sweetheart?" Billy's hands were shaking. His face was completely white. He pushed his plate so hard he almost fell off the log. "No, no." Robert knelt down beside him anxiously. "Son, what is wrong? Are you sick?" Billy looked at his father. His son's eyes were distant, empty, filled with a sorrow that a 6-year-old child could not express. "The pass is closed, we can't get through. The snow is too deep." Robert exchanged glances with Diane. "Which pass, Billy?" "I am talking about Donner Pass. We tried to cross in October, but the snow came early. We're trapped." Billy, who was trapped. Billy's eyes filled with tears. "We all stayed there, we built shelters near the lake. But the snow kept falling. It covered the huts. We couldn't hunt. First we ate the oxen, then the horses, then the dogs. We boiled their hides. We ate their bones. But it wasn't enough." Robert's heart was now beating fast. "Billy, where did you hear this?" Billy wasn't listening. He was staring at the meat on his plate, trembling. "George Donner died in his tent. His arm got infected. Tamsen stayed with him even though she could have gone with the rescue party. We were so hungry." He paused for a moment. His small body was trembling. "We didn't want to, but we had to. We had to survive." Diane took Billy in her arms, but Billy felt stiff and distant. "Who is Jacob, baby?" she asked. Jacob Donner was only 9 years old. "I watched him die." The Hargroves family sat in stunned silence. They had never talked to Billy about the Donner Party. He was 6 years old. He watched cartoons and played with Lego. How could he know these names? How could he describe hunger and death in such detail? Robert's hands were shaking. He took out his phone and searched for a signal. The signal was very weak, but he managed to find a Wikipedia article about the Donner Party. George Donner, Tamsen Donner, Jacob Donner, all the names he had mentioned were real. Even Robert had only recently learned these names. They were all members of the group stranded between 1846 and 1847. They had all died. Billy wiped his eyes. Now he spoke more quietly. "I wrote everything down. I hid the diary in a cave above the camp. I didn't want anyone to find it. I didn't want anyone to know what we went through." Billy, who are you? The child looked at him with an impossibly old expression. My name is Lewis Keseberg. I was the last survivor. The Hargroves family decided to leave the campground at dawn. They headed straight for their home in Sacramento. Billy slept in the back seat the whole way. His face was peaceful, as if nothing had happened, but Robert and Diane kept thinking about the previous night. When they got home, Diane did what any frightened mother would do. She called their pediatrician, Dr. Raymond Kellerman. She begged for an emergency appointment. Dr. Kellerman had been Billy's doctor since birth. He was in his 60s, a patient man. His gray hair and calm demeanor reassured anxious parents. He listened attentively as Diane recounted what had happened in the mountains. Dr. Kellerman nodded thoughtfully. He took some notes. He smiled gently. Children's imaginations are incredibly active, especially smart kids like Billy. He probably saw something on television. He heard a conversation at school. He might even have picked up a book at the library. The mind is very good at turning bits of information into detailed stories. Deanne nodded. He described the cannibalism. Ray. He said they ate a boy named Jacob Donner. He said his name was Lewis Keseberg. Dr. Kellerman's expression didn't change. Lewis Keseberg is one of the most notorious figures in California history. There are documentaries, podcasts, even a horror movie about the Donner Party. Billy may have absorbed this information without you realizing it. Robert leaned forward. He is a 6-year-old child. He can barely sit through a 20-minute cartoon. You think he watched a documentary about cannibalism? Dr. Kellerman clasped his hands. I think Billy experienced something frightening in the mountains. Maybe the altitude or isolation triggered anxiety. His mind created a story to process those feelings. Kids do that all the time. It is called confabulation. But Diane wasn't satisfied. She spent the next 2 weeks researching everything she could find about the Donner Party. She read books, she watched documentaries, she combed through academic journals, and what she read horrified her even more. Because Billy hadn't recounted facts anyone could find on Wikipedia. He had recounted details found only in obscure historical records. She knew the Donner family's shelters were at Alder Creek, 6 miles from the main camp at Truckee Lake. He knew that George Donner had injured his infected hand while repairing a wagon axle. He knew that Tamsen Donner had refused rescue 3 times, choosing to stay with her dying husband. And most disturbingly, he knew about Lewis Keseberg. Keseberg was one of the most controversial figures of the Donner Party. A German immigrant, Keseberg was the last person alive when the 4th and final rescue party arrived at the camp in April 1847. He was found alone, surrounded by the mutilated bodies of the other immigrants. He openly admitted to eating human flesh. For the rest of his life, he was accused of killing Tamsen Donner for her money. In his final weeks, he faced accusations of insanity and immorality. He died in 1895, a disgraced man. He insisted he had done what was necessary to survive. Billy knew all this, and he claimed to have kept a diary. Diane contacted Professor Nathaniel Crawford, a historian at UC Davis who specialized in westward expansion and the California Trail. Crawford was a tall man in his 40s. Years spent debunking sensational claims about frontier history had made him skeptical. On Thursday afternoon, he agreed to meet with the Hargroves in his cluttered office on campus. Diane brought Billy along. Billy sat quietly in his chair, staring at the poster of the covered wagons. Crawford listened as Diane recounted the events. Then he began talking to Billy. Do you think you are Lewis Keseberg? Billy nodded. Can you describe what Lewis looked like? Billy thought for a moment. Tall, dark hair. He had a crippled leg. He was crushed under a wagon before he reached the mountains. This detail was correct. Keseberg had indeed injured his foot in a car accident on the road. This injury had caused him to slow down and eventually become stranded. Crawford pulled out a folder. He took out several black and white photographs. I am going to show you some photos of people from that period. Do you recognize anyone? He placed 5 photos on the table. 4 were photos of randomly selected men from the 1840s. 1 was a known photograph of one of the Donner Party survivors. However, Keseberg's photograph could not be definitively identified. Billy leaned forward. He examined each photograph carefully. Then he pointed to a photograph of a man with a thick beard and a stern gaze. This one isn't from our group. He pointed to a photograph of a man with sunken eyes, pale and ghostly looking. That is William Eddy. He was rescued by the first rescue party. Billy hesitated. He looked at his mother. He ate his friend's arm to survive. Crawford was shocked by what he heard. The photograph really was of William Eddy. The information about cannibalism during the Forlorn Hope expedition was true. However, few people outside academic circles knew about it. Crawford tried a different approach. Billy, if you really were Lewis Keseberg, you would know things that aren't in the history books. Can you tell me something that nobody knows? Billy looked at his hands. I have a diary where I wrote everything down. I wrote every day throughout the winter. I wrote about the hunger, the cold, the people who died. I wrote about the things we had to do. I hid the diary in a cave above Alder Creek, behind a rock that looked like a bear's head. I didn't want the rescue teams to find it. I didn't want them to know the truth about Tamsen. Crawford leaned back in his chair. Billy, dozens of archaeological digs have been done in the Donner area. Everywhere has been searched. If there was a diary, someone would have found it by now. Billy raised his head. Crawford saw the same disturbing old quality in the boy's eyes that Diane had described. No one looked in the right place. The entrance to that cave is hidden. It was covered up in 1852 when the rocks shifted. But I can show you where it is. Crawford glanced at Diane. Then he turned back to Billy. He didn't believe in reincarnation. He didn't believe in past lives or supernatural memories, but he believed in historical evidence. And if there was even a 1% chance this child could lead them to the Donner Party's undiscovered artifacts, it was worth investigating. Let's say I believe you. Can you draw me a map? Billy nodded. Crawford gave him a piece of paper and a pencil. The boy drew quickly and confidently. He drew the outline of Donner Lake, the location of the main camp, and the path leading to where the Donner family shelters were located along Alder Creek. Then, he drew a group of trees and a small X above the creek. The cave is here. You have to climb up the creek. There is a big pine tree split by lightning. The entrance is behind it. It is covered with rocks and dirt. There is a small room inside. It is wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in a crack in the back wall. Crawford took the map and studied it. The markings were correct, the camp's correct. But the cave, he had never heard of a cave in that area. 2 weeks later, Crawford organized a small expedition. He contacted Dr. Angela Reyes, an archaeologist from the University of Nevada in Reno, who had been working in the Donner region for over a decade. 2 graduate students and surveying equipment set out. The Hargroves family insisted on coming too. They met in May at Donner Memorial State Park. The ranger on duty, a friendly woman named Patricia Kowalski, wished them luck. She reminded them not to stray from the marked trails. Billy walked with a confidence that unsettled everyone. He didn't hesitate at forks in the road. He didn't need to consult a compass. He just walked. Occasionally, he stopped to look at a tree or a rock formation. He nodded his head as if confirming a memory. Leaving the main paths behind, they walked for over an hour through dense thickets and scattered rocks. Dr. Reyes. Finally, Billy stopped. Above Alder Creek, on a steep slope, stood tall pine trees. Billy pointed to a massive tree with a blackened, split trunk. Right there, by that tree, lightning struck it when Lewis was alive. The cave is behind it. Crawford and Reyes approached the tree. At first, they saw nothing but rocks, soil, and tangled roots. But then Reyes noticed something. He knelt down and began carefully clearing away loose stones and soil. After 5 minutes, he revealed a narrow gap between 2 large rocks. It was just wide enough for one person to squeeze through. Crawford pulled out a flashlight. He held the flashlight into the darkness. The small room illuminated by the light was no more than 6 feet deep and 4 feet high. The air smelled of damp earth and stone. And there, in the back corner, wedged into a vertical crack in the rock, was a small package. Crawford's hands were shaking. He reached for the package. He carefully pulled it out. Everyone held their breath. He slowly unwrapped the cloths. Inside, preserved in the dry, cold environment of the sealed cave, was a leather-bound diary. The cover was worn and stained. Crawford carefully opened the diary. It had been written from November 1846 to March 1847. The handwriting was cramped and desperate, and on the first page, in clear writing, was a name, Lewis Keseberg. Professor Crawford sat down on a flat rock outside the cave entrance. Dr. Reyes' scientific composure was completely shattered. The graduate students were silent. They stared at the small leather book as if it might vanish at any moment. Diane hugged Billy tightly. Tears streamed down her face. This couldn't be possible. Archaeological discoveries weren't made because of a 6-year-old boy's nightmare. History didn't emerge through children's memories. Yet they held physical evidence, proving that everything Billy had said was true. The journal began in November 1846, when the group was stranded by early blizzards. Keseberg wrote of his initial optimism, his belief that rescue would come quickly, and the careful rationing of food. He described the construction of primitive shelters, the freezing cold, the snow rising until it covered the roofs of the cabins. He wrote of children crying from hunger, adults growing weak and sunken-eyed, the terrible calculations made to survive. By December, the tone had changed. Keseberg's handwriting became more irregular. His daily entries were shorter and more desperate. He recounted the death of Bayless Williams, the first to succumb to hunger and cold. He wrote about the group of 15 known as the Forlorn Hope, who attempted to cross the mountains in improvised snowshoes and never returned. He documented the slow collapse of civilization in the camps, food thefts, arguments, the growing awareness that not everyone might survive. And then, in late December, Keseberg wrote something that would deeply affect Crawford. The others aren't talking about it, but we all know what we must do if the rescue teams don't come soon. We ate the last oxen, we boiled their hides to make glue, we crushed and ate their bones. Franklin Graves is dead. I saw the survivors look at his body. I pray to God for salvation, but I fear he has abandoned us in this frozen hell. Crawford swallowed hard. The next entry was dated January 1847. They have begun. I cannot write the details, for my hand refuses to write the words. We are no longer human. We are animals struggling to survive another day. May God forgive us. Dr. Reyes wiped his eyes. This is the most important primary source discovered so far about the Donner Party. Keseberg's account has always been controversial. Because he was the only survivor of the camp, he had obvious reasons to lie or omit details. But this is a contemporary source. It was written while the events were unfolding. Crawford's mind was racing. He silently read, carefully turning the pages. He searched for specific details that would conclusively prove the diary was genuine, and that Billy's knowledge could not be explained by conventional means. He found it in the entry dated the 15th of March, 1847. Keseberg wrote about Tamsen Donner, the wife of George Donner, who remained with her dying husband while the others agreed to be rescued. George had finally succumbed to his infected wound. Tamsen was now alone at the Alder Creek camp. Keseberg had not left either, as he was very weak and injured. She had been left behind at the main camp near Truckee Lake. The entry described how Tamsen had made a long journey through deep snow to find her and carried a small bundle of belongings she had rescued. Keseberg wrote, "She asked me to keep her valuables safe. Gold coins, a medallion with portraits of his daughters, and letters he had written to them. He feared the rescue teams would steal them. There were rumors that previous groups had looted the dead. I promised to keep them safe until he was rescued. But as he knew, I knew the rescue team would never come. He returned to Alder Creek. 3 days later, I learned he had died there alone." Crawford gasped. This directly contradicted the historical narrative. For over a century and a half, Keseberg had faced accusations that he killed Tamsen Donner for her money. Survivors and rescue teams had stated that Keseberg was found with Tamsen's belongings, silk dresses, and a significant amount of cash. Keseberg claimed that Tamsen had died of exhaustion and starvation, and that he had only taken her belongings to keep them safe. But no one believed him. He was branded a murderer and a monster. He was driven from town to town by angry mobs. His reputation was ruined forever. And now, in his private diary, written so that no one would read it, Keseberg told the same story. He did not confess to the murder. He did not praise the theft. He simply recorded what had happened. His account matched what he would later tell the public about the rest of his life. But there was something even more extraordinary in the diary. In his final entries, dated late March 1847, Keseberg mentioned the approach of the Fourth Rescue Party. He knew they would judge him. He knew they would find him surrounded by the remains of the dead and condemn him as a monster. I hid Tamsen's valuables in the cave where I kept this diary. I cannot carry them with me, because I am too weak and cannot risk them being stolen by the rescue team. If I survive, I will return to retrieve them. If I don't survive, I hope they remain hidden forever and my name is forgotten. The entry ended with this sentence: "I did what I had to do to survive. I am not proud of it, I am not innocent, but I am not the devil they make me out to be. I am just a man who wants to live." Crawford looked at Billy. The boy sat quietly beside his mother. His face wore a calm, distant expression. "Billy, did Lewis hide anything else in this cave?" Billy nodded. "There is a medallion and some coins. Behind where the diary was, deeper in the crack." Dr. Reyes immediately grabbed his flashlight and returned to the cave entrance. He knelt down and carefully reached into the crack. He felt the cold stone. His fingers touched something small and metallic. He slowly pulled it out. It was a gold medallion, darkened, oval-shaped, with a delicate clasp. Inside were two small portraits. On the back of the medallion was an engraving: "To Tamsen, with love, from her daughters, Frances and Georgia." It was well known that Tamsen Donner's daughters Frances, Georgia, and Eliza had survived this ordeal thanks to their mother's sacrifice. Frances and Georgia had been adopted by different families. They had lived long lives in California. This medallion, this heartfelt family heirloom, had been lost for over 170 years. And now, it had been found where Billy said it would be, where Lewis Keseberg said he had hidden it. Dr. Reyes reached over again. He pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were 23 gold coins minted between 1820 and 1845. The coins were worn but intact. They still bore the U.S. Mint stamp. Crawford slowly stood up, still holding the diary. He went over to Billy. He knelt down to meet his eye level. "Billy, do you understand what we just found?" Billy looked at him with those incredibly old eyes. "You found the truth. Lewis wasn't a murderer. He was just trying to survive." Crawford felt tears streaming down his face. "Yes, that is exactly what we found." Billy smiled, and for the first time since the night by the campfire, he looked like an ordinary 6-year-old boy again. "Can we go home now?" he asked. "I am tired." Dr. Reyes carefully documented the site, taking photographs and recording GPS coordinates. The artifacts were placed in protective containers to be taken back to the university. The discovery had to be verified by numerous experts. It had to be analyzed and confirmed. But Crawford already knew what they would find. The diary was real. The medallion belonged to Tamsen Donner. The coins matched the currency of the period. Billy Hargrove had led them to the most important archaeological discovery in California history. And in doing so, he had vindicated a man who had been vilified for over a century and a half. Descending the mountain, Crawford walked beside Billy. "Can I ask you something? Do you still remember Lewis?" Billy shook his head. "Not really. It is like a lost dream. I remember being cold and scared. I remember feeling guilty, but the details are blurring." He looked at Crawford. "Is that normal?" Crawford smiled sadly. "I don't know, Billy. There is nothing normal about this, but I think Lewis can rest in peace now. You helped tell his story. You helped clear his name." Billy nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. They walked in silence for a while. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees, and Professor Nathaniel Crawford, who had spent his entire career believing only in facts, evidence, and the cold logic of history, began to believe in something he couldn't explain. Carbon dating confirmed that the diary and the medallion were from the 1840s. Handwriting experts compared the writing in Keseberg's diary with known examples of writing from later periods. They found consistent patterns. The gold coins were verified as genuine by numismatists. The leather, ink paper, wax seal. Everything was checked. It was real. Professor Crawford spent 6 months transcribing the diary and adding annotations. When it was finally published by Stanford University Press, it immediately became a bestseller. Billy Hargrove, meanwhile, returned to his normal life. The nightmares ended. The memories faded. By the time he was 8, he had no recollection of ever claiming to be Billy Lewis Keseberg. When his family showed him news articles and photos about the expedition, he looked at them with polite surprise, as if they were talking about someone else's life. But some questions remained unanswered. How did Billy know this? How could a 6-year-old child who had never heard of the Donner Party describe the events, people, and places so precisely? How could he lead experts to a cave that had been closed for nearly 2 centuries? How could he know exactly where Keseberg's diary and Tamsen Donner's medallion were hidden? Professor Crawford, who began the expedition as a skeptic, became one of the most outspoken advocates for the possibility of reincarnation. In interviews, he said, "I can't explain what happened. I can only describe what I saw." Billy Hargrove knew things he shouldn't have known. Thanks to him, we understand the Donner Party tragedy in a way we never have before. What if memory isn't limited to a single lifetime? What if the past refuses to stay buried? What if sometimes the dead speak through children's voices not to disturb us, but to heal us? Billy Hargrove is now a young man living a quiet life in Sacramento. He doesn't talk about the Donner Party. He doesn't think about Lewis Keseberg. Do you believe Billy Hargrove truly carries Lewis Keseberg's memories? Somewhere in the Sierra Nevada, the wind still whispers something among the pine trees. Subscribe to join us as we uncover the next mystery that science cannot explain and history cannot forget. Because the past never truly disappears. It simply waits to be remembered.